Run, Jeb, run. That is what his supporters are saying. But will Jeb Bush run for president? We'll ask him.
Enhanced interrogation or torture, the Senate report and the fallout. We're taking that to the roundtable.
The Art Basel crowds are gone, but a new artistic endeavor is just beginning in our national parks and also in Stanwood's neighborhood. Good morning. Glad you could join us. It is a little early, I think, to be talking about 2016 presidential politics, isn't it? Well, early for you, but not for the potential candidates.
Or the people who cover them.
Yes.
And one of the most talked about potential candidates is former Florida Governor Jeb Bush. He has been given speeches on foreign and domestic policies. He's been campaigning with candidates and he's been meeting with donors. And now he says he's releasing all emails from his years as Florida governor into an e-book. All signs he may be leaning toward a run for the White House.
But how close is he to making a decision on that? We wanted to know, and we sat down with Jeb Bush yesterday. Governor Bush.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Great to see you. Thanks for your time. Governor, you have said plainly that you are seriously considering running for president in Washington. You said the decision would be made, quote, in short order. So where do you stand now?
Same place I was when I was in Washington. This is a really serious, kind of life-changing decision, and I'm going to take my time, but I realize that at some point, into this year, early next year, I'll make a decision to really pursue this or to stand down.
Governor, can you go over some of the criteria you're looking at? You did say it would be toward the end of the month. Now would be a really good time to break that news if you wanted. So what's the criteria?
It's really personal. It's really personal. Do I have what it takes to go through a campaign and be capable of leading this country? That's a humbling thought if you're really serious about it. And secondly, is it the right thing for my family? Can they accept the sacrifice that is forthcoming in this kind of deal? So that's the focus. The rest of it kind of falls into place after that. I have no clue if I would be a good candidate. I hope I would be. I think I could serve well as president, to be honest with you, but I don't know that either. I think you learn these things as you go along. But the things that most matter are really personal.
Your wife, Columba, and you just mentioned that you now have been married 40 years. Congratulations. She is not particularly a public person.
Right.
If you are the first lady of this country, you are necessarily a public person. What does Columba say about this?
She's on board, and she was a great first lady in Florida. She's a normal person, so she's not a political wife or a political spouse. She didn't wake up reading Politico.com or something like that. That's why I love her. I mean, she's my balance. She really is my source of serenity and peace, which in my life that's always been really important. So she could serve. She has a heart for people. She's a beautiful woman. I love her dearly.
You know, there's this, as we speak this morning, this weekend, there's been a New York Times article, there's a Washington Post article, the Twitter feeds, I know you don't read, are blowing up. Everyone's expecting an announcement. We have this university, the St. Leo University poll that shows you are more than double digits above the next potential candidate, Mitt Romney. Doesn't that buoy your sort of efforts, that it's well documented, that you've been talking to potential donors and sort of making the circuits? Are you close to that? Are you leaning yes?
I'm going to make up my mind in short order. And as part of that, you know, as I thought about if I'm capable of running and serving, I've looked back at my previous campaigns and the 8 years I got to serve as governor. And it reminded me that in spite of what appears to be the case here in this current environment in Washington, you can do big things if you set the stage in a campaign and then move forward. So one of the things I am going to do as I go through this process is release all my emails and write an e-book, which has been kind of fun to go back and to think about this and remind myself that if you run with big ideas and then you're true to those ideas and get a chance to serve and implement them and do it with passion and conviction, you can move the needle. And that's what we need right now in America.
Big, audacious, hairy goals.
Yeah,
Did I get that right?
BHAGs. Isn't that what you call them, BHAGs?
BHAGs, yeah, we need a few. And so sometime, early next year, I'll release the 250,000 emails This was I was digital before digital was cool, I guess. Now it's like commonplace.
Emails from when you were governor.
Yeah, and it gives a sense of, well, first of all, I think part of serving or running, both of them, is transparency, to be totally transparent. So I'll let people make up their mind. There's some funny ones, there's some sad ones, there's some serious ones.
Well, during the Terry Schiavo case, I'm sure that there was some very critical ones.
Absolutely.
And you responded, I know, to those. You responded. I emailed you a couple of times. You emailed me back. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, you know, staying in touch with people helps in a couple of ways when you're a leader. One is you're not just in your own little bubble. I think presidents get in trouble that way. I think this president particularly isn't out listening to people. If he had, he might have shifted gears a little bit in these off-year elections. But in any case, it's important to stay connected with people. It's important to hear criticism. It's important to share your heart. I also found it a means by which to focus on the details without living the tyranny of the present, you know, focusing on the small things, because that's what, you got to have a servant's heart to do this, and then continue to try to execute on the bigger things as well.
You know what might be really interesting to see in those emails? You were a pretty conservative governor of Florida, you think? And now, watching sort of the trajectory of whether or not you run for president, you've split from your party on the two, you know, your two big platforms, Common Core, immigration reform. And people are looking at you as a moderate Republican candidate. But when you look at those emails, they're going to see a very conservative governor.
Yeah, and it's kind of odd. That's part of what a campaign would be about, to persuade people on immigration.
Which are you? Do you have a label?
I am who I've been. I believe in reform when things are broken, and I believe in limited government, and I believe in liberty being the driver of a successful country. And as part of that, fixing a broken immigration system is critical. If we're going to be young and dynamic and aspirational, we've got to control the border. But we've got to shift to an economically driven system. Right now,
not to family reunification as the prime driver. You want qualified professionals, educated people to be able to come here easily?
I don't want the Dolphins to have the first-round draft pick, because that means they didn't have a good year. But if they did, I would want the Miami Dolphins to have the first 500,000 first-round draft picks. That's what America could do. America could create a system where the best and the brightest could come and have some family reunification and immigration. For sure, it's a humane thing to do. But we have 3 million jobs that are unfilled because of the skills gap. We've lost our entrepreneurial zeal. We still are an entrepreneurial country, but business startups are below where they were in 1995. We have a lot of problems that could be solved if we fix a few big things, and immigration's one of them. So, long story short, if I was to run, I would try to persuade people. I'm not going to change what I believe, and my beliefs, I think, are good, solid, mainstream conservative thought.
You know, a lot of people remember you saying that illegal immigration is not a criminal act, but an act of love. You still feel like that?
Yeah. No, I mean, most people, not all, for sure, but most people that come to this country come for their families, plain and simple. So they break the law. There should be a penalty. They should pay a fine. They should get in the back of the line. They should learn English. They shouldn't get government subsidies. They should work. All those things are the price to pay for coming illegally, but don't ascribe evil motives for people wanting to put food on the table for their families. I mean, look, we've got to get beyond this harsh kind of environment we're in. If we just keep arguing amongst ourselves, the net result is that this country ultimately will be in decline, and our children and grandkids won't have nearly the same opportunities. So maybe that's different. Maybe that's different than what people expect today, but I think we need to find a more unifying way to say what we say and have the humility to recognize that other people may have a view that should be respected as well.
The other issue that Glenna mentioned, where Tea Partiers and very conservative people really disagree with you, is on education and your support for the Common Core standards.
Right.
Your critics, or the critics of the standards, say this is the federal government intervening in what should be local decisions.
Right.
How do you see the Common Core?
Well, standards need to be established and set by states, and Common Core state standards are exactly that. 45 states voluntarily came together for language arts and math to create standards that are common, but more importantly, they're higher. So I'll tell you where I have common ground with people that are concerned about Common Core standards. Any involvement by the federal government should be wrong. They shouldn't use their coercive powers to try to dictate the test or dictate anything. Certainly curriculum shouldn't come close to Washington, D.C. God forbid that would happen. And it ought to be locally driven. And if content ought to be locally driven, standards ought to be state driven. And if people want to opt out of Common Core to higher standards, but uniquely Florida standards or Minnesota standards, fine. That's the problem is our standards are so low that kids graduate from high school and they're not prepared to get a job or not prepared to go to college.
All right,
I mean, who's fooling who?
The Florida state standards, I mean, Governor Rick Scott and some of the members of the legislature objected to Common Core, but they simply appear to have rebranded it and called it the Florida state standards.
In Florida, we have higher standards than the Sunshine Skills standards, Sunshine State standards. I'm for that. And what you call them is not as relevant as how you apply them, the accountability around them, whether you give parents more choices, both public and private, where you end this insidious idea that if you're illiterate in 3rd grade, that you should go to 4th grade thinking that some miracle will happen. This is part of a broader strategy that has moved the needle on student learning, and I applaud the legislature and Governor Scott for staying the course on real reform, which is standards is only one part of.
Right.
Let's take a break right here. We'll be right back. Thanks.
Speaking this morning with former Governor Jeb Bush. And Governor, in a speech that you gave the other day, I think the most interesting thing to me that you said was that whoever the Republican presidential candidate is may have to lose the primary to win the general election so that one's principles, core principles, are not compromised.
It's impossible to become president by losing the primary. I didn't
well,
quite
not
say
lose the primary,
but
but
you have to be true to who you are. You can't. The old days, the kind of if you were in a back room with political operatives, they say, okay, now here's the plan: shift to the left, and then move back to the center if you're a Democrat, or do the same on the right. In the world we're in now, where there's such deep disaffection, where people don't trust institutions, they don't trust the political parties, the system, they don't trust politicians, the idea that you could kind of, and everything is digitized and your life is open for 24/7, the idea that you can just kind of say you're for one thing and then change it after you win.
Didn't work for Charlie Crist.
Well, he made he was trying to do the massive belly flop of all times, because he not only did he shift in a primary to a general, he shifted parties. I mean, he shifted.
People lost track of.
Kind of got confusing.
Didn't that happen with Mitt Romney, though? Was that his sort of downfall a couple of years ago?
He struggled in the primary because the emphasis on subjects that he was uncomfortable with, I think he got off message. He should have said, "Here, I'm a problem solver. My life has been about building things up and solving problems and moving forward. That's why we need, whatever." And then you explain why that would matter as president. And he got sucked into the, sucked into other people's agendas. And I think it hurt him a little bit. And I think about this almost daily. I think Mitt Romney would have been a spectacular president in this time. And he was proven right in a lot of his beliefs and ideas shortly after the election as well. So winning with purpose, winning with meaning, winning with your integrity is what I'm trying to talk about.
Yeah. Governor, speaking to Mitt Romney, a big problem for him was private equity activities, his business dealings, offshore bank accounts, and you are the head of your company's Britton Hill Holdings, and you have started various private venture equity funds, of millions of dollars, $61 million for BH Global Aviation, $26 million for BH Logistics, and then shale oil, $40 million fund. And this is all above board, but some people look at this and say, hey, this is what got Mitt Romney in trouble.
Look, to compare the Britton Hill 3 investments, where we're investing in existing businesses, not controlling them, to allow them to expand and to grow, to Bain Capital, which is a multi-billion-dollar business, that's flattering. I'll take it as a compliment on one level. And I think Mitt probably didn't defend an incredible success story. But that's totally his deal, and that business doesn't, you know, it's like comparing an apple to a peanut in that regard.
The other question.
Let me say about this. You know, in 2008 we started this business. We have made 3 investments. We're doing it with serious partners. We're creating jobs. We're expanding business. I'm not ashamed of that at all. I think that practical experience is something that might be useful in Washington, D.C., to be honest with you, where it's all in this bubble where they have no concept of what impact the massive amount of rules and taxes and regulations, the complexity of Washington, D.C. has on the entrepreneurial spirit of this country. I'm not ashamed. I think taking risk and creating jobs is what we ought to have more of.
Actually, some of the analysts are saying because of your involvement and because of this aggressive push into private, you're doing well, you're making money, you're having fun in a business sense, that's a clear sign that you may not run. Because what you should be doing, they say, is sort of divesting, pulling back, and prioritizing a campaign.
That's a good point. So if I make a decision to go forward, I will do just that.
What, pull back?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's and I'm more than capable of doing that.
So Britton Hill is more than just Jeb Bush?
Absolutely. I have 3 partners. It's an incredible group of young guys that have done extraordinarily well and come together to build this business. So they'll do fine without me.
Let me ask you, you have said on a number of occasions that if you do run, you want to do it in a positive, joyful faction. And I think the obvious question is, in this toxic political atmosphere, particularly in Washington, but as you said, across the country, people don't like politics, they distrust politicians. How can you be joyful in this atmosphere?
So if the decision, if I give myself a green light, I have to do this with enthusiasm and passion and joy. To be able to actually be in a position where you could run and win to serve should be something that you want to give people a sense of how important that is and why it's important. And the other thing that I think is important is that in order to win, you got to get to 50. This is, sometimes people forget this, unless there's 3 people running or 4. But in our country, you normally have 2 major candidates, and to win, you got to get to 50. You can't get to 50 by subtracting. You've got to get to 50 by adding. You don't do well in bringing people together if you're carping, criticizing, turning around and saying, well, you're not as good as me. You know, you've got to stay above the fray and be respectful of good, fine people that will be running as well. And do what Ronald Reagan did, which is
don't speak ill of another Republican.
Try your hardest not to. That's harder now. The culture's different. You got all these independent groups. But the simple fact is there ought to be a big-time effort on all candidates to do this, because there's a big difference between the Democratic nominee, whoever he or she may be, and a Republican nominee that has big ideas to make things work. And so there's a practical reason to be positive as well, I think.
So if you don't run, who do you throw your support toward?
The candidate that fills the space with big ideas, that is positive, that is optimistic about there's no reason to be moping around here.
Do you have a name yet? You have that candidate
I'm giving you the kind of the profile. We're a moping around country temporarily. I think this is a temporary contagion. This is the most spectacular time to be an American, and this is the most spectacular place to do big things. And we should just shake off this pessimism and start thinking again, as Americans normally do, which is, if we've got a problem, let's fix it and embrace the future rather than fear it. And right now, that's not the way it is, and campaigns can be about shaping that, I think.
You know, Governor, in the last 15 seconds we have, it's been a couple minutes, you've had time to think. Go ahead. What's the decision?
Happy holidays, happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year.
You'll be back to break that news with us, maybe?
Could be.
That'd be good.
Governor Jeb Bush, great to speak with you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
And once again, that recent St. Leo University poll of Republicans found that Jeb Bush is the top choice as the GOP nominee by a wide margin.
34% said they support Bush, 15% said they support Romney, just 10% for Marco Rubio. Up next, the Roundtable. Welcome back. The focus on police relations with communities of color, with protests and gatherings this weekend locally and nationally.
And that is just one of several topics to chew over with our roundtable this week. We are glad to welcome Dr. Marvin Dunn, psychologist. He chaired the psychology department at FIU until his retirement. This week he published a provocative op-ed piece in the Miami Herald on the role that black parents, he says, must play to prevent violence against their children.
We are glad to welcome back to the roundtable Rosemary O'Hara, same woman, new name. Congratulations on your marriage. The editorial page editor of the Sun-Sentinel. And also a big welcome back to the roundtable to Mark Caputo, political reporter for the Miami Herald and also Herald columnist. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Great to have you come in. All right, let me just ask you all to kind of individually weigh in on what you heard Jeb Bush say. Is this a guy, Mark Caputo, you know him well, you covered him in Tallahassee. Is this a man who was running?
Well, it depends on how you define running. I mean, he's more likely to announce that he's going to run for president than not announce that he's running for president. I mean, I imagine he's going to do it.
Yeah. Rosemary, what do you think?
Oh, it was my impression that this is a man who's running. I was surprised to hear that his wife is fully on board.
Yeah.
Right?
That was news to me.
Yeah.
He's been out making speeches, talking to big donors, articulating the message, framing the ideas, writing the book, releasing the emails.
Yeah.
He is laying the groundwork for what will be an announcement that a lot of people will be excited to hear.
Yeah, they will. And I want to say that a few months ago, your editorial page wrote, if Republicans want someone who can win the White House, they should pull out the stops, make sure Jeb Bush runs for president in 2016. So Sun-Sentinel, at least, is on record. Marvin, welcome. Glad to have you here with us. How did Jeb Bush sound to you?
I think he's going to run. I hope he does. Jeb Bush is about exciting as oatmeal without the raisins. He doesn't have the charisma. He's not an exciting candidate. He doesn't have the charisma to really carry a strong campaign. He is totally out of touch with the common man. He has ruined public education in Florida and will probably do the same thing at the national level. He talks a lot about raising the standards of education, which is important, but what about raising the schools and improving their functioning as opposed to ruining them by siphoning off the best students and faculty? So,
Created the voucher program.
yes, I hope he does run, and I think Hillary will beat him soundly, and I'm hopeful that he'll be the candidate.
You know what, a lot of the takeaway from this, not only the information he talked about, you wrote a column, five reasons, five signs he's going to run. Aside from the information, Bush made a big deal about his comportment. He mentioned being the harsh environment, being more collegial, being nicer, stop moping. He mentioned the president only once. There was no bashing of anyone. That's got to be sign number 6, that he's more statesmanlike and ready for this position.
I think so, but I pegged that column to a speech he gave at the U.S.-Cuba Democracy PAC in the Biltmore Coral Gables Hotel. The speech was full of haymakers directed at President Obama. So the idea that he won't criticize President Obama, I don't know that's going to happen. Also, the idea that he thinks he can do this joyfully in today's media environment, Twitter and blogs, and a really polarized electorate and a lot of different voices at the table. I find that tough to believe. He's going to be sucked into the vortex, and I don't know if he's going to be able to do it joyfully.
I couldn't agree more. I just don't think that you can certainly try to talk about ideas and be above the fray and be joyful and positive. But at some point, every politician gets sucked down into the vortex, and the ones who succeed are the ones who are able to somehow spin out of it.
And in the last Republican primary, it was sort of the whack-a-mole with the candidates,
Yeah.
you know, and those who had inflammatory and I see some of the other names who are out there as they might have more spirit to them, but to me, Jeb Bush is the pragmatist. He's the adult in the room. But I do think he's going to have a tough time getting through the primary, dealing with people who don't want immigration reform and don't want these standards in education.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm ready for a female president. Not necessarily Hillary, but we've had, 44 or so men presidents? And I think it's time to let the country be run by a woman. I'm willing to vote for almost any female president except Sarah Palin.
Michelle Bachmann.
Well, all right, there's a short list of women I wouldn't.
Is this a nod to Elizabeth Warren, maybe?
Well, I think she's going to have trouble igniting the base. I think she's not well known enough, particularly among blacks, and that's going to be critical for taking the nomination. But I just think that it's time to have a woman run the White House. They don't have the kind of testosterone problems men have. Look at Putin and Obama, who's got the biggest.
I see the campaign banner
missile
coming.
Right now. Women will come in, look, guys, settle this. Hey, I got to go to Publix. Get this settled. Let's move ahead here.
Golda Meir and Margaret Thatcher.
Good
I mean, there have been a number of very outstanding women presidents in other countries, and I hope you're right. I hope one day we get there.
I can sadly say that now that I'm 41, you do lose a lot of testosterone, as you know, once you pass your mid-30s. So I'm not sure how much vinegar these
I'm feeling a change of subject right about now coming on.
Pobrecito. Finally, on the subject of Jeb Bush, I've got to say that when it comes to immigration reform, Mark, the Tea Partiers who are saying that he is just too out there on immigration, when you heard him say essentially we've got to find a way to allow productive immigrants who are here, who are not here legally or may have come here legally, overstayed their visas, whatever, to give them a way to stay here legally and be productive citizens, and then attract very attractive, well-educated people to come here and fill the jobs that we need, high-tech jobs mainly. I mean, what's so radical about that?
Well, we're going to find out how radical that is. There are certainly very loud voices, mainly on the far right, who oppose almost any mention of immigration reform because it inevitably leads them to say amnesty.
Amnesty.
However, it does appear, at least in all of the polling, that it is a minority of the Republican Party. It is a minority of conservatives. But again, we're going to have to find that out, and Jeb Bush is going to be a trial balloon or a test case for that.
And the one other issue, though, is that it's about jobs. And given the Great Recession, people are worried about immigrants coming here and taking their jobs. Right. And so even when he talks about the Miami Dolphins, I wonder, is he going to go recruiting overseas? And what about all our college athletes?
I don't see people lining up to take those jobs in Homestead picking tomatoes. Yeah. And I think Bush makes a mistake, and the Republicans do, when they say, well, we need the brightest and the best from other countries to come here. And we do need that. But we need labor. We need people to come in and do the yards, do the work that folks have been willing to do who come in from these countries. And how do you account for allowing those folks to be a part of the American dream?
Well, it's interesting that he framed it as an economic issue rather than a family reunification issue.
Right.
Exactly.
Well, the pushback that you will find from opponents of immigration reform is that having this illegal immigrant pool that we have, and perhaps even legalizing these folks, down presses wages anyway. If you didn't have illegal immigration, you wouldn't have such low wages because people are being paid under the table and not being paid a legal minimum wage that would be higher.
Right. I think that what he is arguing is not about the people, Marvin, in Homestead who are picking our tomatoes and other vegetables here or in the Great Valley in California or anywhere else. He's thinking about the person, the young man or woman who just got a PhD in electrical engineering at MIT, who is Chinese or from India, and who we want to keep that person here, and we have not made it easy for that person.
Well, it's about time then.
Yeah, good. Before we take a break, let's change topics, and we'll begin on this and continue on the other side. The CIA, the Senate Intelligence Committee report on torture, detention, I read some of the summary, and Rosemary, it is it's stunning stuff, and really takes your breath away when you hear about rectal hydration and rectal feeding and chaining people in to walls. I mean, some of the stuff you just say, how could they do it? Here's a picture of some waterboarding. How could they do it, and why didn't it produce usable information?
Well, I think the CIA is trying to argue that it did produce some, but this report says it didn't. Right. It didn't produce actionable information. It's an outrage. It's an absolute outrage what we have discovered that our country participated in our desire to keep ourselves safe. But what we've learned, if there's some good that comes from it, we've learned it doesn't work. It shouldn't be a tool in the toolbox. And the one positive is that at least America comes clean. At least we're willing to put our dirty laundry out there and say, look, this is it. And now we can all look at that and say, is that what we want to stand for? Is that the culture that we want America to stand for in the world? And I hope all of us say no.
You know, a lot of people are saying that that's one-sided, and that's something we want to talk about when we come back. Take a couple minutes of break. We'll see you on the backside. We are back with a wonderful roundtable. Marvin Dunn, writer, author, historian, retired professor, veteran Miami observer. Okay, Rosemary, once Goudreau, now O'Hara, editorial page editor at the Sun-Sentinel, and Mark Caputo, the Miami Herald's go-to political columnist and reporter. And we were talking about the Senate Intelligence Report on torture/enhanced interrogation. And, you know, the debate today is, when do the means justify the ends? And remember, after 9/11, and we watched buildings burn, and we would have done anything to stop that from happening again. Dr. Dunn, give us the psychology on that.
Well, we've always tortured people. Have we forgotten My Lai? Have we forgotten the things we did in Korea, the things we did in Europe? It's a part of war. It becomes a difficult thing when it's state-sponsored, when the government says it's okay to do it. And I think that's what happened here. But we were angry. Almost anything could have gone after 9/11. And the government was not organized to conduct these interrogations. So things got out of hand. But I agree, at least we fessed up. You know, that's the kind of country we are. We did wrong, we did these things, at least we let the world know that we regret having done them.
Let's, if we can, talk a little bit about the shut it down protest. I mean, you said you were at the boat parade in Fort Lauderdale yesterday, and I don't know how big the group was, but some young people, mainly young people, marched and tried to inconvenience, not hurt anybody, but show their anger, their frustration with the lack of indictments in the Eric Garner and Michael Brown cases. Did you see, what did these people say to you?
Well, you know, the thing about the protest overwhelmingly is that they are continuing. They are continuing to draw attention to something that people want something done about, and that's a good thing. They're not violent. You know, you're not seeing the cars being turned over and the looting. And in this case, there were police cars following them, and there were a lot of white people in this protest too. So the outrage that America is feeling about about this practice or a pattern of black men being shot by police officers, people want something done about it.
You know, the cases at hand now, you've got Eric Garner, you've got Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin is now a name that's brought up, and then this little
boy in Cleveland.
Right. These are such different cases. The circumstances are so different, but for the common thread of a dead black boy at the hands of a white man. And so the question becomes, is it a pattern, and do police treat, subconsciously or consciously, people of different colors differently? And how do you stop that?
Well, the answer is yes, they do.
Yes, they do.
I think it would be winking at reality to say anything else. Marvin, this week on Monday, you published, I thought, a very strong piece in the Miami Herald, the op-ed page. I want to put a quote up on the screen. People can consider just one of the things that you said. What you said was, white parents tell their boys not to disobey police officers because they could be arrested. We black parents tell our sons not to disobey police officers because they could be killed. This is one of the defining differences between white and black America today.
Well, that was the conversation my dad had with me and my brothers when we got driver's license. It's important. The thing I was trying to accomplish with that piece was to speak to black parents in particular, because we do have a responsibility here. And let me be very clear. There are problems with the police. I recognize them. I've experienced them. I've written about them. There are problems. They're not all racist, they're not all out-of-control police officers, but they do generally see black people, black men especially, differently than they do white men. And therefore the treatment on the street tends to be different, tends to be a bit rougher. And therefore you have these events escalating into the sort of things that we're dealing with. So there are problems. But it doesn't matter if you're right, if you're a young black male, if you get into a confrontation with a police officer. It doesn't matter if the cop is white and wrong and you're black and right if you're dead. So obey the police officers. Deal with why you're being arrested at the appropriate time. But above all, don't resist arrest by a police officer. I don't know any other argument on the other side of that.
So you said you took a bit of a heat for that op-ed column. Why and from whom?
I got heat from blacks who thought that I was a sellout for suggesting that Michael Brown had, in some ways, invited the confrontation with the officer. There are blacks who felt that I should not say anything positive about the police at this point. And then there were right-wing people who wrote me saying, you blacks are always bellyaching about the police. It's a good thing we have cops who have the attitude that they're going to control crime in these black ghettos because the country's out of control. So I got it.
And there's the problem, that division. And just worth it to say that a couple of graffiti taggers have lost their lives in the past 2 weeks, one of them and a couple of years ago, and they were not black men, they were white men who died at the hands of police.
Well, I think we do obviously have a problem talking about race, and there's good reason that we have that problem. But it should be said that even though the statistics are incomplete, more white people, probably because there are more white people in the country, are shot by police than black people. It's probably disproportionate relative to the population levels, where blacks are disproportionately shot and arrested. That having been said, it's nevertheless something that we should look at more broadly is how do we police? In the Eric Garner case that happened in New York, the guy was ostensibly being incarcerated, or they were arresting him to incarcerate him for allegedly selling cigarettes. It's a misdemeanor. At a certain point, you just have to wonder, like, maybe we're passing a few too many laws and we have a prison industrial complex that incentivizes police to lock up everybody. It does start with minorities, but there are a lot of white folks who get locked up as well.
But I'm so glad the Eric Garner tape was there, because America could see, here's a man pleading, I can't breathe, and the police suffocated the life out of him. Terrible case. Very difficult for the police to defend.
And that is what has spurred outrage. And you see, as Rosemary said, white young people and black young people and Hispanics and others, I think, are out protesting this sense of injustice. We saw something terrible, and
why are you going to incarcerate someone for selling cigarettes to begin with? I mean, I'm just putting aside just the choking or non-choking or suffocation issue. I mean, you write him a ticket.
I'm afraid we are out of time. We could go on here and probably should never even got to Amendment 1. I'm sorry about that. Anyway.
Next week.
We'll get to it. The hustle and bustle of Art Basel may be over, but another art exhibit is flourishing in somewhat more natural surroundings. We are headed there to Stanwood's neighborhood next. While art lovers were taking in Art Basel and all those satellite art fairs here last week, another exhibition was going up.
And it is still going on right now, far from the city at Biscayne National Park. It's art about nature with a purpose, and it's in Janine Stanwood's neighborhood.
In this part of South Florida, you can feel like you are one with nature, even with the city in eyeshot. It's Biscayne National Park, and tucked inside its visitor center is art, quilts, made with cloth and paint, different textures and colors that show how vibrant and how fragile this nature is. Biscayne National Park is more than 90% water, and scientists say the ecosystem beneath is at risk.
Well, one of the biggest threats to many national parks is climate change. Coral bleaching is another issue. When temperatures rise, coral can bleach out, lose its color, lose its animals, and that can be fatal to the coral if it goes on for too long.
Coral bleaching, rising sea levels are images in these 26 quilts. Maya Schonenberger curated the exhibit called Piecing Together a Changing Planet. The artists are Florida-based.
I try to raise awareness, but I don't want to be too much in the viewer's face. I really want the viewer to start thinking and create their own thoughts.
You painted the butterflies.
All 61 of them.
Biology teacher turned artist Milani Brewer says she hopes her work inspires.
I think it's important for everybody to know that we're losing a tremendous number of plants and animals all the time to extinction. And hopefully through my art and through the pieces that I do of the animals that are almost extinct, that I'll be able to bring light to their problem.
When people see the beautiful art, they read the text that talks about how it connects into a national park, and they realize that something that belongs to them, the national parks, is at threat, is at risk from these things, then that starts the conversation and perhaps changes the way they act in their own lives.
In the neighborhood, I'm Janine Stanwood for This Week in South Florida.
Wow, really beautiful. Those same 26 quilts will travel to 9 different national parks around the country.
All right, and still to come, my personal perspective on a possible presidential run by that man, Jeb Bush. Before we leave you this morning, a personal perspective about the possibility of another Bush in the White House. We are talking, of course, about Jeb Bush, our former Florida governor. He told us that he is still seriously considering a run for the White House. But look, who is kidding whom? He is running. I'll bet the next month's mortgage payment on it. And you know what? I hope he does run. Now, that's not an endorsement, just a recognition that Jeb Bush is well qualified to be the GOP presidential nominee, and he could conduct the kind of campaign that would make us all less jaundiced about politics. What sets Jeb apart from most of the other hopefuls is his strong stand on 2 key issues: immigration reform and the Common Core education standards. He is absolutely committed to both and says he will not compromise to please the wingnuts in his party. The right wing of the Republican Party says Jeb Bush is too moderate. That's hooey. This guy is conservative down to his Brooks Brothers skivvies, but conservative in a way that, say, Robert Taft was conservative or his father. For my taste, Jeb Bush was too conservative as governor at times. He was wrong to intervene in the Terri Schiavo tragedy. The state simply had no business in that case. Still, Jeb Bush is a thoughtful, solid guy who will bring some of his big, hairy, audacious ideas to the presidential race. I don't see how he can do that in a joyful, uplifting campaign. I sure want to see him try. So many have given politics a bad name and a bad taste in our mouths. A Jeb Bush campaign might cure that. That is my perspective for this week. I hope you have a great Sunday. Remember, as always, stay informed, get involved.
And of course, we would love to know what you think about the campaign or anything we've discussed, anything in the news. And here are all the ways you can reach us: email, Facebook, Twitter. We are very easy to find, and we hope to hear from you soon. Have a beautiful day.
And go Dolphins. Beat those Patriots.